18 unexplainable events, 9 states, 72 hours. While America went about its daily routine, a pattern emerged that scientists can't fully account for. Water erupted from solid ground where no water should exist. The sky formed shapes that defied natural explanation. Animals fled by the thousands without apparent cause. And buried beneath American soil, ancient warnings surfaced at the exact moment the nation needed to see them. The timing is too precise. The pattern is too clear. Coincidence or something far more deliberate? It started in the Gulf Coast, not with a forecast, not with a warning, just water. Families along the coastline woke to a normal morning. Coffee brewing, children getting ready for school, the usual routines of daily life. By mid-morning, those same neighborhoods were underwater. The floods didn't build slowly. They arrived. Witnesses described the same experience across multiple cities. The water appeared suddenly, rising from drains, seeping through foundations, surging across streets that had been dry moments before. Drainage systems designed for heavy rainfall were overwhelmed in minutes. Roads that looked completely normal transformed into rivers within the span of a single news broadcast. In New Orleans, pumping stations failed almost simultaneously. The water came faster than the infrastructure could handle. Streets filled, cars floated. Residents who had lived through previous storms said this felt different. There was no hurricane offshore, no tropical system on the radar, just water, appearing as if the ground itself had decided to release it. What the Gulf Coast experienced wasn't just severe weather. It was the first visible sign of a pattern that would unfold with disturbing precision over the next 72 hours. The waters rose, infrastructure failed, and while officials worked to manage the immediate crisis, they missed what was happening beneath the surface, literally, because the floods were only the beginning. While news cameras focused on the devastation above ground, the Earth itself was preparing to respond in ways that would force even the most skeptical observers to question whether these events were truly random. Psalm 18 describes it with prophetic clarity. The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook. The foundations were about to shake, but not where anyone expected. And what came next would make the floods look like a warning shot. While the Gulf Coast was still counting the cost of sudden flooding, attention shifted to California. Not because of water this time, because the ground itself decided to move. The landslides started in areas that had been stable for decades. Hillside communities near Los Angeles woke to a sound residents described as unsettling. Not the rumble of an earthquake, not the crash of thunder, a deep, grinding noise, like the earth was shifting beneath their foundations. And it was. Slopes that had supported homes, roads, and infrastructure for generations began to give way. Small cracks appeared in driveways. Fissures opened in yards. Property lines that had been surveyed and marked for years suddenly became irrelevant as entire sections of earth slid downward. What started as minor ground movement accelerated within hours. While California hillsides collapsed, sinkholes began opening across Florida. Not near coastlines this time. Inland, in areas with no recent flooding, no obvious trigger, no seismic event to explain the sudden failures. The first sinkhole appeared in a residential neighborhood outside Tampa. Residents heard a sharp crack, like a gunshot, echoing through the night. When they investigated the next morning, a perfectly circular hole had opened in the street, 20 feet across, depth unknown. Within 48 hours, 7 more sinkholes appeared across central Florida. Each one opened suddenly, each one in areas where the ground had shown no previous signs of instability. Emergency officials closed roads, evacuated homes near the formations, and struggled to predict where the next collapse might occur, because there was no pattern they could identify, no geological markers that explained why these specific locations failed while surrounding areas remained stable. The fractures weren't consistent with normal erosion. They were too clean, too precise, as if something beneath the surface had shifted all at once, creating simultaneous breaks across miles of terrain. One park ranger, speaking off the record, described the fracture patterns as almost deliberate. The comment was dismissed officially, but the observation lingered. Scientists working to explain the widespread ground failures pointed to a combination of factors. Previous wildfires had destroyed root systems that anchored soil. Drought had created subsurface voids. Heavy rainfall had saturated weakened earth. Each individual event had a plausible explanation, but the timing, ground failures across multiple states within the same narrow window, that remained harder to explain. Isaiah 24 describes this exact phenomenon. The earth is broken up. The earth is split asunder. The earth is violently shaken. The earth reels like a drunkard. It sways like a hut in the wind. The language is specific, not gradual erosion, not slow geological change, violent shaking, sudden breaking, the earth responding as if under pressure it can no longer contain. What America was experiencing matched that description with uncomfortable precision. The ground people had built their lives upon was proving far less stable than assumed. Foundations were failing. Infrastructure designed to last generations was cracking within days. And the failures weren't isolated to one region or one geological condition. They were widespread, coordinated in timing, if not in cause. Impossible to predict. Job 9 offers another unsettling parallel. He moves mountains without their knowing it, and overturns them in his anger. He shakes the earth from its place, and makes its pillars tremble. Mountains moved without warning, earth shaken from its place, pillars, foundations, trembling. The biblical language wasn't vague symbolism. It was precise description of what witnesses across multiple states were reporting in real time. Solid ground had become unreliable. What should have held firm was giving way, and the psychological impact was profound. Because humans build everything on one fundamental assumption: the ground will hold. When that assumption fails, everything else becomes uncertain. Roads can be rebuilt, homes can be repaired, but trust in the earth itself, that's harder to restore. Glaciers that had maintained their shape for centuries split open, as if pressure from within was forcing them apart. The breaks sent shock waves through nearby valleys. Communities living in the shadow of these frozen giants felt the ground shake as millions of tons of ice separated and crashed downward. Residents described a sound unlike anything they'd experienced. Not the crack of breaking ice, a deep, resonant boom that echoed for miles. Like the earth itself was announcing something. Scientists monitoring the glaciers scrambled to understand what triggered such widespread breakage. Temperature records showed no unusual warming. Seismic sensors detected no earthquakes large enough to destabilize the ice. Yet the glaciers were fracturing simultaneously across multiple ranges. In Montana, similar reports emerged. The Northern Rockies, home to some of America's most studied glacial formations, experienced breaks that defied established patterns. Ice that should have remained solid was splitting, not melting, breaking. The distinction matters. Melting is gradual. It follows temperature curves. It responds to seasonal changes. What was happening in Montana and Alaska wasn't gradual. It was sudden, structural, complete. Park officials closed access to several areas. Too dangerous. The ice was behaving unpredictably. What had been stable yesterday couldn't be trusted today. Weather patterns offered no explanation. The days when the glaciers fractured weren't unusually warm. Some breaks occurred during temperature drops, when the ice should have been contracting and strengthening, not failing. Glaciologists studying the phenomenon admitted publicly that the timing confused them. Off the record, some used stronger language. This wasn't normal. This wasn't following known cycles. The ice was responding to something they couldn't measure. And then the pattern expanded beyond glaciers. But none of the explanations fully accounted for the precision of the patterns. Job 38 poses a question that resonates eerily with what was unfolding. From whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? when the waters become hard as stone, when the surface of the deep is frozen. The passage frames ice as something controlled, bounded, held in place by forces beyond human understanding. When those boundaries break, Scripture suggests it's not random. It's revelation. What America was witnessing, glaciers fracturing out of season, ice forming in impossible conditions, frozen structures breaking in geometric patterns, matched the biblical description of boundaries being removed. The ice, ancient and seemingly permanent, was proving as unstable as the ground that had failed days earlier. First water rose without warning. Then earth gave way beneath communities that trusted it. Now ice, the symbol of permanence and stability, was breaking apart. 3 elements, 3 failures, 3 signs that what seemed solid was anything but. Psalm 46 describes the terror of such moments. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. The psalm acknowledges the horror, earth giving way, mountains falling, waters roaring, but offers a response, recognition that these failures point beyond themselves. They're not just geological events, they're signals, and the signals were about to expand from earth, water, and ice to something even harder to dismiss. Because while the ground broke and the glaciers fractured, something was happening in the sky, something that would force even the most determined skeptics to look up. The atmosphere itself was preparing to speak, and what it would reveal couldn't be explained by weather patterns or natural phenomena. The heavens were about to display signs that matched ancient prophecies with disturbing clarity. The failures on the ground were documented, measured, photographed. Scientists could point to soil composition, seismic activity, temperature fluctuations. The explanations varied in completeness, but they existed. What happened in the sky offered no such comfort. It began over the Midwest, places where the horizon stretches for miles, where farmers know the weather by instinct developed over generations, where unusual cloud formations get noticed immediately, and what appeared was impossible to miss. Massive roll clouds began forming across Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri, not occasionally, not in isolated incidents, repeatedly, in the same regions, following patterns that meteorologists struggled to explain. Roll clouds require specific conditions, temperature inversions, precise wind alignments, atmospheric instability at exact altitudes. They're rare under normal circumstances. Seeing one might happen once in a season, if at all. But over a 72-hour period, witnesses across 4 states reported seeing them again and again. The clouds didn't drift randomly. They stretched across the horizon in perfect cylindrical formations, rolling slowly, silently, dominating the skyline. Some extended for miles, unbroken, uniform, as if sculpted rather than formed. Residents stopped their work to watch. Phones came out. Videos flooded social media. The images were stunning and deeply unsettling, because the clouds brought no rain, no thunder, no lightning, just presence. They appeared, hung in the sky for minutes or hours, then dissipated. No weather event followed. No storm justified their formation. They simply existed, displayed themselves, and withdrew. Meteorologists offered explanations, outflow boundaries from distant storms, atmospheric waves, rare but natural phenomena. The science was sound. The explanations were plausible, but they couldn't account for the frequency, the repetition, the way these formations appeared in the same areas day after day when such clouds should be extraordinary events, not regular occurrences. One Kansas farmer, interviewed by local news, said something that captured what many were feeling. "I've watched the sky my whole life. 73 years. I've never seen it behave like this. It's like something's trying to get our attention." The comment was dismissed as colorful local perspective, but the observation wasn't wrong. While the Midwest watched roll clouds, other atmospheric anomalies appeared across the country. In the Pacific Northwest, pilots reported strange light phenomena at high altitudes, Not northern lights, not lightning, structured lights that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Commercial aircraft instruments registered the events. Flight data confirmed unusual electromagnetic readings, but the sources remained unidentified. Air traffic controllers noted the reports, filed them officially, quietly wondered what was happening in airspace that had been routine for decades. In the southwest, the sky took on colors that didn't match normal sunset patterns. Deep purples, unusual oranges, hues that photographers documented extensively, comparing them to historical records and finding no precedent. The colors weren't tied to pollution or particulate matter. Air quality readings showed normal ranges, yet the sky displayed itself in ways that defied standard optical explanations. And in multiple states, witnesses reported clouds that seemed to hold shapes far longer than natural turbulence should allow. Not vague shapes that required imagination, distinct formations, geometric patterns, structures that maintained definition while surrounding clouds shifted and dispersed normally. The footage was reviewed, analyzed. The shapes were real, documented, present in the atmospheric data. What they meant was the question no one could answer scientifically, but Scripture addresses it directly. Joel 2 describes signs that precede major transitions. I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood, before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Wonders in the heavens, not destruction. Wonders, signs, displays meant to be seen and recognized. Luke 21 reinforces the theme. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. Signs in the heavens, anguish on earth, perplexity, confusion, inability to explain what's happening. The atmospheric phenomena across America match that description. Events that were visible, documented, real, but perplexing, defying complete explanation, creating a sense of unease that raw data couldn't dispel. Acts 2 adds specific detail. I will show wonders in the heaven above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and billows of smoke. Wonders above, signs below. The pattern was complete. Below, the earth had fractured, water had surged, ice had broken. Above, the atmosphere was displaying phenomena that refused to fit neatly into natural categories. The sky was speaking, not with words, with presence, with displays that demanded attention even from those who preferred to look away. And this created a problem for anyone trying to maintain that everything was normal. Because when the ground beneath you fails, you can avoid certain areas. When water rises, you can seek higher ground. When ice breaks, you can stay away from glaciers. But the sky is everywhere, inescapable, constant. When the heavens themselves begin displaying signs, there's nowhere to look that offers escape from the question they raise. Is this natural, or is this intentional? The atmospheric anomalies weren't destructive. That's what made them more unsettling than storms or tornadoes. They didn't demand evacuation. They demanded interpretation. And interpretation required acknowledging that a pattern was forming. Water, earth, ice, sky. 4 elements, 4 types of events, all within 72 hours, all across the same nation, all defying complete explanation. Scientists worked to categorize each event individually. Officials managed each crisis as it arose. Media reported each incident as news. But step back, look at them together. See them as parts of a whole, rather than isolated events, and the pattern becomes undeniable. Creation itself was responding, from the depths of the earth to the heights of the atmosphere, from water to stone to ice to air. Every element was signaling simultaneously. The question was no longer whether a pattern existed. The evidence was too extensive, too coordinated, too precise. The question was what the pattern meant, and whether anyone with the authority to answer was willing to speak the truth publicly. Because while scientists parsed data and officials managed logistics, something else was happening that would make atmospheric anomalies look tame. The animal kingdom was responding. And when creation's most instinct-driven creatures begin to move in coordinated patterns, ignoring every natural cycle they normally follow, the message becomes harder to dismiss. They were fleeing by the thousands, abandoning territories they'd occupied for generations. And what they were sensing, humanity was about to discover. They were fleeing by the thousands, abandoning territories they'd occupied for generations. And what they were sensing, humanity was about to discover. They were fleeing by the thousands, abandoning territories they'd occupied for generations. And what they were sensing, humanity was about to discover. The first reports came from bird sanctuaries along the Central Flyway, one of North America's most critical migration routes. Millions of birds travel this corridor twice yearly, following patterns so precise you can set calendars by them. Except this year, they didn't follow the pattern. Flocks that should have arrived in early fall simply never appeared. No silhouettes against the dawn sky. No distinctive calls. No massive formations wheeling overhead. Ornithologists waited, checked weather patterns, reviewed historical data, extended observation periods. The birds didn't come. Some flocks were eventually spotted, hundreds of miles off their normal routes, moving in directions that made no sense geographically, avoiding areas they'd used as stopover points for centuries. When researchers attempted to track tagged specimens, the data revealed something unsettling. The birds weren't lost. They were deliberately avoiding specific regions that, within weeks, would experience some of the events already documented. Floods, ground failures, atmospheric disturbances. The birds knew before the disasters struck, and they left. But it wasn't just birds. Along the Atlantic seaboard, marine biologists documented unusual movements in coastal waters. Dolphins, typically abundant in shallow bays and inlets, moved offshore en masse, not gradually, not in response to food sources or temperature changes, all at once, as if responding to a signal. Sonar readings showed large fish populations clustering in deeper waters, far from their normal feeding grounds. Species that had maintained consistent patterns for decades suddenly abandoned them. Fishermen noticed immediately. Catches dropped. Not because of overfishing or seasonal variation, the fish simply weren't there anymore. Charter boat captains, some with 40 years of experience in the same waters, described it as the strangest thing they'd ever witnessed. The ocean wasn't empty. The life had just moved, away from land, toward deeper, open water, as if the shallows had become dangerous. In the Pacific Northwest, forest rangers reported mass movements of deer and elk. Radio collars showed herds relocating from stable habitats into unfamiliar, less suitable terrain. There was no wildfire driving them out, no predator surge, no human development forcing displacement. They just left. Hundreds of animals. Coordinated movement. No apparent trigger. Similar reports emerged from the Appalachians. Black bears abandoning dens weeks before hibernation season, moving into territories already occupied by other bears, risking conflict rather than staying where they were. Wildlife biologists proposed explanations: magnetic field fluctuations affecting navigation, subtle temperature shifts, disrupted food chains. Each explanation accounted for one species in one location, but none explained why so many different species across such vast distances were exhibiting the same behavior simultaneously. Birds altering migration by hundreds of miles. Marine life fleeing coastal waters. Mammals abandoning established territories. All at the same time. All across the same nation where water, earth, ice, and sky had already signaled disturbance. The Bible addresses this directly. Job 12 instructs, "Ask the animals, and they will teach you, or the birds in the sky, and they will tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will instruct you, or let the fish in the sea inform you." The passage isn't poetic metaphor, it's practical observation. Animals perceive what humans miss. They respond to changes in pressure, electromagnetic fields, subsurface vibrations, signals that human senses can't detect. Throughout history, animals have fled before earthquakes struck, before tsunamis arrived, before volcanoes erupted. They don't understand the science. They don't need to. Instinct moves them away from danger before danger becomes visible. Jeremiah 8 adds another layer. Even the stork in the sky knows her appointed seasons, and the dove, the swift and the thrush observe the time of their migration. When birds that have followed precise patterns for millennia suddenly break those patterns, it's not confusion, it's response to something fundamental changing. Isaiah 1 makes it even more pointed. The ox knows its master, the donkey its owner's manger. But Israel does not know, my people do not understand. Animals recognize what humans, despite all their technology and analysis, often miss. What was happening across America followed this pattern exactly. While scientists debated data and officials managed crises, the animal kingdom was voting with its feet, wings, and fins. They were leaving, not randomly, not in response to individual local conditions, systematically, as if the land itself had become unreliable. And there was historical precedent. In 1815, the year without a summer, farmers across North America recorded strange animal behavior months before the climate catastrophe became apparent to humans. Birds migrating early, livestock refusing to graze in certain fields, fish disappearing from rivers. Only later did they understand these were advance warnings of a global atmospheric shift triggered by a massive volcanic eruption half a world away. The animals knew first. Humans learned later, after the damage was done. Now, in the present, the pattern was repeating. Wildlife responding to disturbances humans couldn't yet measure, moving away from areas that seemed perfectly safe to human observation. The question wasn't whether the animals were sensing something real. Their coordinated response across multiple species confirmed that. The question was what they were sensing that humanity's instruments couldn't detect. What signal was being broadcast through the natural world that required no technology to receive, only instinct? And if animals were fleeing areas before visible disaster struck, what did that suggest about the areas they were abandoning? The pattern was becoming clearer. First, natural elements responded: water, earth, ice, atmosphere. Now, living creatures were responding. Layer by layer, creation itself was reacting to something. But the pattern wasn't complete yet, because while animals fled and skies signaled, another element was preparing to speak, one that throughout biblical history has represented both purification and judgment, one that consumes what it touches, leaving nothing hidden. Fire was coming, and when it arrived, it wouldn't behave like natural wildfire. It would burn with patterns that defied explanation and precision that suggested intention. The flames were about to reveal what all the other signs had been pointing toward. Fire is predictable. It follows fuel sources, spreads with wind direction, intensifies with heat and dryness. Firefighters build entire strategies around these predictable behaviors, until the fire stops being predictable. Maui burned in a way that violated every standard wildfire pattern. The flames didn't creep through brush gradually, giving residents time to evacuate. They exploded through Lahaina with speed that trapped people in their homes and cars. Wind certainly played a role. Dry conditions contributed. But what happened in Lahaina went beyond normal wildfire behavior. The fire moved through the historic town in minutes, not hours, jumping roads that should have served as fire breaks, igniting structures in patterns that didn't follow wind direction. Survivors described the same experience repeatedly. No warning, no gradual approach of flames, just sudden, overwhelming heat and smoke that turned day into darkness. Cars trying to evacuate were overtaken on roads. Metal melted. Glass shattered from heat. People fled into the ocean, the only escape route the fire couldn't follow. When investigators arrived after the flames subsided, What they found raised disturbing questions. The ignition pattern didn't point to a single origin. Multiple fires appeared to start simultaneously across different areas of town. No lightning had been recorded. No power line failures were detected at the precise moments ignition occurred. The fires simply began. Multiple locations. Same time. Maximum devastation. Official reports cited wind-driven embers as the explanation for multiple ignition points. Possible, plausible even. But witnesses who lived through it described something that didn't quite match. The fires didn't seem to spread randomly. They moved with what felt like purpose, consuming specific areas while leaving others strangely untouched. Photographs from the aftermath showed this inconsistency clearly. Houses burned to foundations, while trees 10 feet away remained green. Cars melted on one side of a street, while structures on the other side stood intact. Fire doesn't normally behave this selectively. Maui wasn't alone. Across the western states, wildfire behavior during the same 72-hour period departed from established patterns. In California, fires ignited in areas that hadn't experienced significant fire danger in decades. Not during the usual fire season, not in the driest regions. In places where fuel loads were managed and risk assessments showed low probability. Yet, they burned anyway. In Oregon, firefighters battling a blaze reported something they'd never encountered. The fire advanced, then stopped at a specific boundary. Not a fire break, not a road, just an invisible line. As if it had reached the edge of its assigned territory. It held that position for hours, didn't spread beyond it despite favorable conditions and available fuel. Then, suddenly, it jumped miles ahead, igniting in a completely separate area with no clear ember pathway to explain the leap. The fire was behaving erratically, unpredictably, in ways that decades of firefighting experience couldn't anticipate. In Colorado, similar reports emerged. Fires starting without clear ignition sources, spreading in directions that didn't match wind patterns, stopping and restarting in ways that violated fire behavior models. Each incident, examined individually, had potential explanations: unusual wind eddies, hidden fuel pockets, rare atmospheric conditions. But taken together, they formed a pattern of fire, behaving as if following rules humans didn't understand. The Bible uses fire as a recurring symbol, not just destruction, purification, exposure, judgment. Joel 2 describes it vividly. Before them, fire devours. Behind them, a flame blazes. Before them, the land is like the Garden of Eden. Behind them, a desert waste. Nothing escapes them. Fire that devours completely. Fire that leaves nothing hidden. Fire that transforms landscape from life to waste. Amos 7 presents an even more unsettling image. This is what the Sovereign Lord showed me. The Sovereign Lord was calling for judgment by fire. It dried up the great deep and devoured the land. Fire as judgment. Fire that doesn't just burn surface vegetation, but reaches deep. Fire that transforms fundamentally. What happened in Maui and across western states carried echoes of this biblical fire. It didn't just burn. It consumed. It revealed. It separated what could withstand heat from what couldn't. Malachi 3 asks the critical question, "But who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? For he will be like a refiner's fire or a launderer's soap." Refiner's fire doesn't destroy randomly. It burns with purpose, separating pure from impure, revealing what survives, testing from what doesn't. The selective burning patterns in Maui, some structures destroyed while others stood untouched mere feet away, resembled refining more than random wildfire. And Hebrews 12 offers the theological foundation. For our God is a consuming fire. Not a comforting metaphor, a warning. Fire represents the nature of divine presence encountering what cannot stand in that presence. The fires across America weren't just natural disasters requiring emergency response. They were the latest element joining the pattern. Water had spoken. Earth had responded. Ice had broken. Sky had signaled. Animals had fled. Now fire added its voice. And fire speaks differently than other elements. Water can be channeled, earth can be stabilized, ice can be avoided, but fire transforms permanently. What it touches never returns to original state. The message fire carries isn't subtle, it's absolute. And the fact that fire was now behaving unpredictably, burning in patterns that defied normal wildfire models, suggested something beyond natural disaster. It suggested intentionality. While flames consumed forests and towns, while firefighters struggled against blazes that refused to follow understood behavior, something else was literally rising from the ground. Ancient warnings, buried for centuries, were being exposed. And what they revealed would connect every element of the pattern: water, earth, ice, sky, animals, fire, into a unified message. A message carved in stone, hidden until the exact moment America needed to see it. The earth was giving up its secrets, and those secrets spoke of things falling and rising again. The ground fractures that opened across Utah weren't just geological failures, they were excavations. What had been sealed beneath rock and soil for centuries suddenly lay exposed, not through planned archaeological digs, through catastrophe. When researchers entered the newly revealed caverns in the remote Nevada-Utah border region, they expected to find natural cave formations, stalactites, mineral deposits, standard geological features. What they found instead was architecture, not natural architecture, deliberate construction. The cavern walls showed evidence of tool marks, smooth surfaces where stone had been cut intentionally, chambers that were too geometrically precise to be natural erosion. And carved into those walls were symbols. The markings weren't random scratches or natural mineral patterns. They were organized, systematic, written in lines that suggested language, though not one that matched any known Native American writing system. The symbols showed consistency, repeated characters, structured arrangements, the hallmarks of actual writing, not decorative art. Specialists brought in to examine the carvings struggled with classification. The style showed elements that resembled ancient Old World scripts, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Proto-Semitic, but matched none exactly. It was as if whoever created these markings drew from multiple ancient writing traditions, but created something distinct. The most significant carving appeared in the largest chamber, a relief showing a towering structure rising above crowds of figures. The detail was remarkable. Individual faces visible. Clothing suggested hierarchy. The structure itself showed architectural sophistication. And beneath this central image, carved in the same unknown script, was a phrase that specialists attempted to interpret through structural analysis rather than direct translation. The interpretation that emerged was chilling in its simplicity. The fallen city will rise again. Not a city, not cities in general. The fallen city, specific, singular, as if referring to something readers would recognize. In biblical tradition, one city above all others symbolizes human pride and divine judgment, Babylon. Genesis 11 records its fall. Revelation 18 prophesies its return in symbolic form. The city that fell because it tried to reach heaven through human achievement. The city that becomes, in prophetic literature, representative of all human systems that elevate themselves against God. The fallen city will rise again. If the interpretation was accurate, the message wasn't historical documentation. It was prophetic warning. And it had been hidden underground until ground failures, part of the very pattern being documented, exposed it at this specific moment in American history. The timing was impossible to ignore. For centuries, these carvings lay buried, undiscovered, unknown. Then, during the same 72-hour period when water surged, earth fractured, ice broke, sky signaled, animals fled, and fire consumed, the ground opened to reveal ancient warnings about systems rising that should remain fallen. Luke 8 states it directly, "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." What was buried doesn't stay buried. What was hidden comes to light. And the timing of that revelation carries meaning. Daniel 12 adds another dimension. But you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Some messages aren't meant for the moment they're written. They're sealed, preserved, hidden until the time when they become necessary. The Utah-Nevada discoveries fit this pattern. Messages written in antiquity, sealed by earth and time, revealed at a moment when America was experiencing the exact kind of systemic instability the warnings described. Access to the cave sites was restricted shortly after the initial discoveries. Officials cited safety concerns, unstable ground, risk of further collapse, reasonable explanations, completely plausible. But the timing of the restrictions, coming just as word of the discoveries began spreading, raised questions among those tracking the broader pattern. Throughout history, inconvenient discoveries have been quietly closed off, not through conspiracy, through bureaucracy, through legitimate safety protocols that happen to prevent public examination of troubling evidence. Whether that's what happened here is unknown. What's documented is simple fact. Ancient warnings about fallen systems rising were discovered during a period of unprecedented natural instability. Then access was restricted before thorough independent analysis could occur. Matthew 10 offers a warning about such moments. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. The verse doesn't promise immediate, easy revelation. It promises eventual exposure. What's hidden will surface. What's concealed will be known. But that knowledge often comes despite resistance, not because of cooperation. Numbers 32 provides an even more sobering principle. You may be sure that your sin will find you out. What's buried eventually surfaces. What's hidden eventually appears. And when it does, it reveals not just ancient history, but present reality. The symbols carved in Utah caves weren't just archaeological curiosities. They were mirrors, showing that the same patterns that led to judgment in ancient times, pride, self-elevation, systems that positioned themselves as ultimate authorities, were present now. The fallen city rising again isn't necessarily literal Babylon being rebuilt in the Middle East. It's the spirit of Babylon, human achievement divorced from divine acknowledgement, appearing wherever that pattern takes hold. And if ancient warnings about that pattern were surfacing from beneath American soil, at the exact moment America was experiencing signs across every element of creation, the implication was unavoidable. The warnings weren't just about the world in general or some future time. They were specific, present, urgent, and utter. While archaeologists debated dating methods and linguists analyzed symbol structures, the practical question remained unanswered. Why now? Why did ground failures expose these specific warnings during this specific period? Random chance? Geological coincidence? Or part of the same pattern that had water rising, earth breaking, ice fracturing, sky signaling, animals fleeing and fire consuming? The evidence was piling up, event after event, sign after sign, each one explainable individually, each one impossible to dismiss as part of the whole. And the whole was beginning to look less like a series of natural disasters and more like a coordinated message. But from what source? With what authority? Toward what end? The answer to those questions required stepping back from individual events and looking at the mathematical reality of what was occurring. Because when you calculate the actual probability of this many unusual events happening simultaneously across this many locations in this narrow a time frame, the numbers tell a story that's difficult to dismiss. 17 major events, 9 states, 72 hours. When you examine each event individually, explanations exist. Heavy rainfall causes flooding. Soil saturation triggers landslides. Temperature fluctuations affect glaciers. Atmospheric conditions create unusual cloud formations. Every single event has a scientifically plausible explanation when viewed in isolation. But they didn't occur in isolation. They occurred simultaneously, across vast geographic distances, in a time frame so compressed that emergency response systems were overwhelmed trying to address multiple crises at once. And when you calculate the probability of that simultaneous occurrence, the mathematics become disturbing. Statisticians look at independent probability when assessing whether events are random or coordinated. The principle is simple. Multiply the individual probabilities to get the likelihood of simultaneous occurrence. If event A has a 10% chance of happening in any given week, and event B also has a 10% chance, the probability of both occurring in the same week is 1%, 0.10x 0.10. Add a third independent event with similar probability, and you're at 0.1%. By the time you reach 17 unusual events occurring within 72 hours, even being generous with individual probability estimates, you're calculating odds that strain credibility. Researchers who have studied the pattern, off the record in private conversations, suggest the probability of this many unusual natural events occurring simultaneously by pure chance falls somewhere in the range of 1 in several million. Not impossible, but so improbable that it demands explanation beyond statistical coincidence. And that's before considering the geographic pattern. The events didn't cluster in one region, which might suggest a single triggering cause. They spread across the entire continental United States, coast to coast, north to south. Yet, they occurred within the same narrow time window: flooding in the Gulf, landslides in California, sinkholes in Florida, glacier breaks in Alaska, ground fractures in Utah, atmospheric anomalies in the Midwest. Tantut, wildlife disruptions along migration routes spanning multiple states, wildfires exhibiting unusual behavior across the West, archaeological exposure in the Southwest, different mechanisms, different elements, different regions. Same 72 hours. When you map it visually, the pattern looks less like random natural disaster distribution and more like coordinated activation across multiple systems. One analyst, reviewing the data privately, described it as statistically alarming, not because any single event was unprecedented, but because the clustering defied random distribution models. It's the difference between getting heads on a coin flip once, common, and getting heads 17 times in a row, theoretically possible but practically suspicious. At some point, probability becomes so low that alternative explanations deserve consideration. The Bible addresses this exact principle. Amos 3 asks, "When a trumpet sounds in a city, do not the people tremble? When disaster comes to a city, has not the Lord caused it?" The passage doesn't suggest God micromanages every difficult event. It suggests that when disasters pile up in patterns too precise to dismiss, divine involvement becomes a more reasonable explanation than astronomical coincidence. Isaiah 46 makes the case even more directly. "I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please." The claim is explicit. History isn't random. Events follow patterns, and those patterns reveal purpose. When 17 unusual events across 9 states occur within 72 hours, hitting every major element — water, earth, ice, atmosphere, biology, fire, and even archaeology — the pattern suggests intention, not human intention. The events weren't caused by coordinated human action. They were natural phenomena, but natural phenomena following a pattern too precise to attribute to chaos. Ecclesiastes 3 provides the framework. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. Timing matters. When things happen carries as much meaning as what happens. The fact that all these events compressed into the same brief period, after decades or centuries of relative stability in many of these areas, suggests the timing itself is the message. Not disasters happen sometimes, but these specific disasters happened now, together, in this pattern. The mathematical improbability forces a question that scientific analysis alone can't answer. Is this pattern random, or is something being communicated? If you believe creation is purely mechanical, governed solely by physics and probability, then these events are an extraordinary but ultimately meaningless coincidence. If you believe creation can be used to convey meaning, that the natural world can serve as a communication medium, then this pattern looks like language. And if it's language, what's being said? The water spoke of judgment. The earth spoke of instability. The ice spoke of boundaries breaking. The sky spoke of signs. The animals spoke of warning. The fire spoke of purification. The ground spoke of hidden things revealed. 7 elements, 7 messages, all delivering variations of the same theme. What seemed stable is shifting. What seemed permanent is temporary. What seemed secure is fragile. And the timing, concentrated into 72 hours during a period of profound cultural, political, and spiritual division in America, suggests the message is directed, specific, urgent. The mathematics don't prove divine intervention. Mathematics can't prove that. But they make coincidence mathematically untenable as a complete explanation. Something connected these events. Whether that something was atmospheric, geological, or spiritual becomes the question. And that question was about to become unavoidable. Because the pattern wasn't finished. The elements had spoken. The probability had been calculated. The evidence had accumulated. Now the pattern was about to shift from natural phenomena to something that crosses the boundary between physical and metaphysical. What appeared next wouldn't fit into geological surveys or weather reports. It would demand interpretation of a completely different kind. Because the sky was about to display something that science could document but not explain. Something that looked less like atmospheric phenomena and more like a message written in light. Because the sky was about to display something that science could document but not explain. Something that looked less like atmospheric phenomena and more like a message written in light. It happened in Oregon, deep forest, night, a place where darkness is absolute and human presence minimal. A monitoring satellite, conducting routine atmospheric surveys, recorded something wholly unexpected. At 2:47 a.m., a column of light appeared in a remote clearing, not spreading horizontally like a searchlight, descending vertically. A perfect cylinder connecting sky to earth. The light formed a circle on the forest floor, luminous, contained, precise. The satellite's thermal imaging showed no heat signature, no combustion, no electrical discharge, just light, pure, unexplained. The phenomenon lasted between 60 and 90 seconds. Estimates vary. Then it vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. When local emergency responders reached the site hours later, they found the clearing exactly as the satellite data suggested. The ground within the circle showed slight warmth. Not burning, just warm to the touch. Everything else was undisturbed. Trees surrounding the circle showed no damage. Bark intact, leaves green, no scorch marks, no evidence of fire or intense heat. The light had been present, had touched the ground, but had not consumed. Scientists examining the site struggled with classification. Lightning creates heat signatures, creates char patterns, burns. This had done none of that. Electrical phenomena leave residual electromagnetic readings, ionization in the air, disrupted electronics in the vicinity. None of that was detected. The light had appeared, illuminated, withdrawn, without leaving traditional evidence of its energy source. Atmospheric specialists proposed ball lightning, rare electrical phenomenon, poorly understood but documented. The explanation had one significant problem. Ball lightning doesn't descend in perfect vertical columns. It moves erratically, follows magnetic fields, dissipates irregularly. This light had been geometrically precise, controlled, deliberate. The biblical parallel was unavoidable for anyone familiar with Exodus. Moses encounters God in the wilderness through a burning bush, but Exodus 3 specifies something crucial. The bush was on fire, but it did not burn up. Fire present, heat present, light present, but no consumption, no destruction. The angel of the Lord appeared in flames of fire, yet the bush remained intact. What happened in Oregon matched that pattern. Light descended, touched earth, left warmth, but no damage. Presence without destruction. Ezekiel 1 describes a similar phenomenon. I looked, And I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light, light that announces presence, light that draws attention, light that appears with purpose rather than random natural occurrence. Acts 9 records another instance. Saul on the road to Damascus. Suddenly, a light from heaven flashed around him. Not gradual dawn. Sudden light. Specific. Targeted. Transformative. The Oregon event shared these characteristics. Sudden appearance. Precise location. Brief duration. No natural explanation that fully accounts for the observed phenomena. And the timing placed it within the same 72-hour window when every other element had activated. Water had risen, earth had fractured, ice had broken. Sky had signaled, animals had fled, fire had consumed, ancient warnings had surfaced. Now, light descended. Not destructive light, not chaotic light, controlled light. Light that illuminated a specific place for a specific duration, then withdrew. John 1 establishes light as more than physical phenomenon. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. In biblical theology, light represents revelation, truth, presence, divine communication. When unexplained light appears during a period marked by unprecedented natural instability, the symbolism becomes impossible to separate from the physical event. The Oregon column wasn't alone. In the days surrounding its appearance, scattered reports emerged from other remote locations. Hikers describing unexplained illumination in forests, drivers seeing brief intense lights in empty fields, ranchers reporting nocturnal brightness with no identifiable source. Each report was anecdotal, unverified, easy to dismiss individually. But the clustering, multiple reports of unexplained light phenomena during the same period when documented unusual events were occurring across every other natural system fit the pattern. Something was manifesting through light, not continuously, not everywhere, but in specific moments and locations, as if testing whether anyone was watching, whether anyone would recognize what was being shown. The scientific community largely ignored the Oregon event, one anomalous data point, insufficient evidence for peer-reviewed analysis. Interesting, but not significant. But those tracking the broader pattern couldn't dismiss it so easily, because light appearing without fire, illuminating without consuming, descending in perfect geometric form during a period of widespread natural upheaval, carried meaning that transcended atmospheric physics. It suggested intention, communication, presence. The question wasn't whether the light appeared. Satellite data confirmed that. The question was what the light signified. Random atmospheric electrical discharge that happened to form a perfect column? Or something using light as a medium to announce presence in a way that would be documented but not fully explained? The answer depended on whether you believed creation could serve as a communication channel, whether natural phenomena could carry supernatural meaning. For those who believed the pattern was random, the Oregon light was a curiosity, strange, but meaningless. For those who believed the pattern was intentional, the light was a signature, confirmation that what appeared to be natural disasters were actually elements of a larger message. And that message was about to become even more explicit. Because while light descended in Oregon's forests, something appeared over Chicago that would be captured not by satellite in remote wilderness, but by weather radar over a major American city. Something that thousands would see, that technology would document, that couldn't be dismissed as anecdotal or misidentified. The sky over the Midwest was preparing to display an image that would force even skeptics to pause. An image that looked disturbingly like a figure, crowned, radiant, standing within the storm itself, as if the chaos wasn't random, as if someone was present within it, watching, waiting, making presence known to those willing to see, as if the chaos wasn't random, as if someone was present within it, watching, waiting, making presence known to those willing to see. Winter storms are routine over Chicago. The Midwest knows snow. Meteorologists track systems. Radar maps fill with expected patterns: precipitation, wind speeds, cloud density. What appeared on radar screens during a major snowstorm wasn't expected. Within the massive weather system, a distinct shape formed. Not vague, not requiring imagination to perceive. Clear, defined, undeniable. A human figure, full form, head, torso, arms, all visible in the radar imagery. And above the head, something that looked disturbingly like a crown. Radiant, circular, positioned exactly where a crown would sit. The image wasn't momentary. It held its form, remained stable while surrounding storm systems shifted and changed. The figure stood within the chaos as if unaffected by it. Meteorologists reviewing the data struggled to explain the formation. Weather patterns don't create human-shaped radar signatures. Precipitation doesn't organize itself into recognizable figures, yet there it was, documented, archived, undeniable. As the image appeared on screens, people on the ground experienced something equally unusual. The wind changed, abruptly, without the gradual shifts typical of storm systems. The sound it made was described consistently across multiple neighborhoods: low, resonant, almost ceremonial, like a sustained note played on an instrument too large to see. The sound lasted less than a minute, then faded back into normal wind noise. But in that minute, thousands of people stopped, looked up, felt something they couldn't quite articulate. Presence, not imagination, not mass hysteria. Something real enough that strangers made eye contact on streets, silently acknowledging they'd all experienced the same thing. The crowned figure remained visible on radar for approximately 12 minutes, then dissipated. The storm continued. Snow fell, but the image was gone. Social media erupted immediately. Screenshots of the radar image spread. Thousands shared it. Millions viewed it within hours. Reactions split predictably. Some saw pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces in random patterns, clouds that look like animals, rock formations that resemble profiles. Others saw something that transcended pattern recognition. The figure was too defined, too stable, too perfectly positioned within the storm's structure, and the timing, appearing during the same period when every other element had signaled, made dismissal more difficult. Revelation 1 describes a vision that resonates uncomfortably with the Chicago image. Someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet, and with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white, like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. A figure, radiant, crowned imagery, appearing in whiteness like snow. The parallel isn't perfect, but it's close enough to be disturbing. Daniel 7 adds another dimension. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven, coming with the clouds, not separate from them, within them. Oh, and always. Using atmospheric phenomena as a vehicle or announcement medium. Matthew 24 makes it more explicit. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, a sign in heaven, visible, undeniable, appearing before the actual return. The crowned figure over Chicago wasn't the fulfillment of that prophecy. The image disappeared. The storm passed. Life continued. But it resembled the prophetic description enough to serve as what Scripture calls a foretaste, a preview, a sign pointing toward ultimate fulfillment. Psalm 18 describes divine manifestation through storm imagery. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. God using weather systems to manifest presence, not metaphorically, physically, visibly. The Chicago event fit this pattern. A figure appearing within storm structure, stable amid chaos, crowned, radiant in the radar signature. Was it God himself? The image didn't claim to be. It simply appeared, was documented, then withdrew. But it served a function that signs throughout Scripture serve, making the invisible momentarily visible, giving those watching something concrete to respond to. For those already convinced that a pattern was unfolding, the Chicago figure was confirmation, proof that the events weren't random, but coordinated, overseen, directed. For those skeptical of supernatural interpretation, the image was fascinating, but ultimately explainable through meteorological conditions they didn't fully understand yet. The divide between these interpretations is unbridgeable through evidence alone. Both groups see the same data. Both acknowledge the image existed, but they interpret its meaning through completely different frameworks. One framework says nature sometimes creates interesting patterns that resemble familiar shapes. The other says nature can be used to communicate truth that transcends physical processes. Neither side can prove the other wrong using the evidence available, but the accumulation of evidence was becoming harder to dismiss. Water, earth, ice, sky, animals, fire, ancient revelations, mathematical improbability, light without fire, now a crowned figure in a storm. Each event, individually, has potential natural explanations, but together they form a narrative, a message being spelled out across multiple mediums, and the message was becoming clearer with each new manifestation. The question was no longer whether unusual things were happening. The documented evidence was overwhelming. The question was whether those unusual things carried meaning, whether they pointed beyond themselves to something or someone attempting communication. The sky had spoken through atmospheric anomalies. Now it had spoken through imagery. But it wasn't finished, because what appeared next wouldn't be in storms or radar or satellite feeds. It would appear in the most unexpected medium of all, in something as temporary as breath, as fleeting as morning mist, in clouds that held shapes far longer than physics suggested possible. And what those clouds would reveal would look less like weather and more like messages written specifically for those willing to look up, in clouds that held shapes far longer than physics suggested possible. And what those clouds would reveal would look less like weather and more like messages written specifically for those willing to look up. Clouds are unstable by nature, water vapor condensing around particles, constantly reshaping, dispersing, reforming. Turbulence ensures that any recognizable shape dissipates within seconds or minutes at most. That's standard atmospheric behavior. What appeared over multiple U.S. locations during the 72-hour window didn't follow standard behavior. The first widely documented instance occurred over the Gulf Coast. Witnesses described a cloud formation that resembled a human figure, not vaguely, distinctly. Head, torso, arms extended outward, as if the figure was standing with arms spread wide. The formation appeared during late afternoon. Golden light from the setting sun illuminated it, creating a glow effect around the edges. Hundreds of people photographed it, posted images online, compared notes. The consensus was consistent. This looked like a person. What made it unusual wasn't just the initial shape. It was the stability. The formation held its basic structure for over 20 minutes. While surrounding clouds shifted and dispersed normally, this particular formation remained recognizable. Meteorologists suggested it was a combination of specific wind patterns and moisture levels, creating temporary stability. Possible, but unusual enough that several noted they'd never seen a recognizable shape persist that long. Then similar reports emerged from other regions. Over the Midwest, multiple witnesses in separate locations reported a cloud formation that resembled a perfect ring, not oval, not irregular, circular, as if drawn with a compass. The ring appeared blue against the surrounding white and gray clouds. Videos captured it from different angles. The circular shape was consistent regardless of viewing position. The formation lasted approximately 15 minutes before dissipating. In the Pacific Northwest, pilots reported cloud formations that appeared to have internal structure, not just shapeless masses, but organized layers that suggested deliberate arrangement. One pilot, with 30 years of flight experience, described it in an interview. "I've seen every type of cloud formation. This was different. It looked constructed, The comment was dismissed by some as subjective impression, but flight data from multiple aircraft confirmed unusual cloud density patterns that didn't match standard formation models. Throughout biblical history, clouds serve as more than weather phenomena. They serve as signs of presence. Exodus 13 records God leading Israel through the wilderness. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way. Not random clouds, specific cloud, pillar-shaped, serving as visible guidance. 1 Kings 8 describes the temple dedication. The priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled his temple. Cloud as manifestation, physical representation of divine presence, so tangible it prevented normal activities. Matthew 17 records the transfiguration. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Cloud as communication medium. Not just visual, but verbal, carrying a message meant to be heard and heeded. 1 Thessalonians 4 points to future fulfillment. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Clouds as gathering point, meeting place, location of encounter between earthly and heavenly. The cloud formations appearing during this period carried echoes of this biblical symbolism. They didn't just look interesting, they looked meaningful. A human figure with arms extended, resembling either welcome or crucifixion posture. A perfect blue ring, resembling a portal or doorway. Structured internal organization, resembling intention rather than chaos. Each formation individually could be explained as rare but natural phenomena. Specific atmospheric conditions creating temporary stability. But the clustering of these formations during the same period, when every other sign had manifested, created a cumulative effect. The clouds weren't just clouds anymore. They were part of the message. What made the cloud formations particularly significant was their accessibility. Satellite data requires expertise to interpret. Radar signatures need technical knowledge. Geological formations require site access. But clouds are visible to everyone. No special equipment needed. No restricted access. Just eyes and willingness to look up. If a message was being communicated through creation, clouds would be one of the most democratic mediums, available to rich and poor, urban and rural, educated and uneducated. Anyone could see them. Anyone could photograph them. Anyone could share what they'd witnessed. And thousands did. The images spread across social media. Comment sections filled with reactions ranging from awe to skepticism. Some saw divine communication. Others saw confirmation bias and pattern recognition. But the conversation itself was significant. People were looking up, discussing what they saw, questioning whether meaning existed beyond the physical phenomena. Even skepticism required engagement. You can't dismiss something without first acknowledging it exists. The clouds had created a conversation, forced attention upward, made people pause and consider whether the sky was trying to tell them something. And while people debated the meaning of vapor formations in the atmosphere, something else was happening at ground level, something that would bring the pattern full circle, back to where it started, back to water. But this time, the water wasn't falling from above. It was erupting from below, with violence, with power, with a message that connected directly to the oldest judgment narrative in human history. The fountains of the deep were breaking open, and what that meant would become impossible to ignore. The fountains of the deep were breaking open, and what that meant would become impossible to ignore. It happened in Reading, Pennsylvania, a normal city street, intact pavement, no visible damage, no construction, no warning signs. Then the ground erupted. Not a leak, not a gradual seepage, an explosion of water upward with enough force to tear through asphalt and concrete. Thick, muddy water shot into the air like a geyser, dark, heavy, saturated with sediment from deep underground layers. Witnesses described the sound first, a sharp crack, like something massive breaking beneath the surface. Then, the roar of water under pressure, finding sudden release. The eruption continued for several minutes, water flooding the street, pushing cars aside, forcing pedestrians to retreat. When emergency crews arrived, they found a scene that looked more like a natural disaster zone than urban infrastructure failure. The water was coming from deep, not from broken water mains, not from surface drainage, from geological layers that shouldn't contain that much water under that much pressure. Officials worked quickly to shut down nearby systems, isolate the problem, control the flow, but the water kept coming, as if the source was beyond human infrastructure, as if something beneath the city had decided to release what it had been holding. Eventually, the eruption subsided. Not because crews stopped it, it simply stopped. The pressure equalized. The flow ceased. What remained was a street torn open, water-damaged buildings, and a question no one could answer satisfactorily. What caused that much water to be under that much pressure in a location where geological surveys showed no significant underground water sources? Reading wasn't alone. Similar events were reported in other cities during the same period. Water erupting from intact pavement, not from infrastructure failures, but from the ground itself. In some cases, the water was clear. In others, heavily contaminated with soil and minerals. But in every case, the force and volume suggested sources deeper than city systems. Geological explanations pointed to aquifer pressure, unusual rainfall saturation, subsurface fractures creating unexpected pathways for water movement. Plausible, technical, grounded in known processes, but difficult to reconcile with the sudden, violent nature of the eruptions and their timing within the broader pattern, because water rising from below carries specific biblical significance. Genesis 7 describes the beginning of the flood that destroyed the ancient world. The verse is specific about the sequence. On that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Two sources: water from above, rain; water from below, springs of the deep. The flood didn't begin with rain alone. It began with subterranean water breaking through boundaries that had contained it. The foundations failed first. Proverbs 8 describes the creation order, when he gave the sea its boundary so the waters would not overstep his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Water contained, bounded, held in place by divine command. When those boundaries break, it's not described as natural geological process. It's described as order giving way to chaos. Job 38 frames it as a question from God, who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb, when I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, "This far you may come and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt." Water has limits, boundaries, commands it's not supposed to cross. When water erupts from beneath American streets, with force that overwhelms containment systems, the symbolism is unavoidable. Something is breaking through boundaries that should hold it in place. Psalm 104 describes both creation and potential judgment through water imagery. You covered it with the watery depths as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. But at your rebuke, the waters fled. At the sound of your thunder they took to flight. They flowed over the mountains. They went down into the valleys, to the place you assigned for them. You set a boundary they cannot cross. Never again will they cover the earth. Water assigned to specific places. Boundaries set. Promise made that global flood wouldn't recur. But the passage doesn't promise that water won't be used as a sign, as a reminder, as a warning that boundaries exist and matter. The Pennsylvania eruptions and similar events elsewhere served that function. They didn't flood cities, didn't destroy regions, but they demonstrated that water below the surface exists under pressure, and that pressure can be released suddenly, violently, unexpectedly. The pattern was complete now, full circle. It began with water rising from floods. It ended with water erupting from below. In between, earth fracturing, ice breaking, sky signaling, animals fleeing, fire consuming, ancient warnings surfacing, light descending, figures appearing in storms, clouds holding meaningful shapes, 11 distinct types of phenomena, 17 major events, 9 states, 72 hours, each element of creation responding, each one contributing to a unified message. The message wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't hidden in symbolism that required interpretation. It was plain, direct, undeniable to anyone willing to see the pattern. Creation was groaning. Boundaries were breaking. Stability was proving temporary. What seemed permanent was revealing itself as conditional. And all of it was happening in America, the nation that had positioned itself as exceptional, untouchable, secure in its foundations. Those foundations were being tested, from below and above, through natural elements that refused to behave as expected. The question was no longer whether these events were connected. The documentation was too extensive, the timing too precise. The question was what they were connected to, what force or will or purpose was coordinating phenomena across such vast distances and different systems. Random chance couldn't account for the pattern. The mathematics made that clear. Natural cycles couldn't explain the clustering. The timing violated established patterns. What remained was the explanation most people resist until every alternative is exhausted. Intentionality, communication, warning. And if this was warning, it raised the most urgent question of all. Warning of what? Warning before what? The answer to that question would require looking beyond individual events to the theological framework that predicted exactly this kind of pattern. A framework written thousands of years ago, describing signs in creation that would precede the most significant transition in human history. The end of one age, the beginning of another, the return of authority that had been rejected. The signs were documented. The pattern was clear. The timing was converging. What came next would determine whether America and the world was paying attention. The signs were documented. The pattern was clear. The timing was converging. What came next would determine whether America and the world was paying attention. Throughout Scripture, signs don't appear randomly. They follow sequences. They build toward moments of transition. Matthew 24 provides the framework. The disciples ask Jesus a direct question. What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? His answer is specific, not vague, not symbolic, concrete. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Birth pains. The metaphor is deliberate, carefully chosen. Birth pains don't happen once. They come in waves. They increase in frequency. They grow in intensity. And they signal something approaching, something inevitable, something that can't be stopped once the process begins. What America experienced in those 72 hours fits the birth pain pattern exactly. Not one event, multiple events. Not in one location, various places, not one type of disaster. Different categories: water, earth, ice, atmosphere, biology. The pattern matches the prophecy. Different types of events across different locations happening closer together. Romans 8 reinforces the imagery. The whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Creation itself responding. Not just human systems failing. The natural world groaning under pressure it wasn't designed to carry indefinitely. The groaning isn't punishment. It's labor, process, movement toward something new being born. Every element that responded during those 72 hours was groaning. Water surging, earth fracturing, ice breaking, sky signaling, animals fleeing, fire consuming, even the ground giving up what it had hidden. All of it groaning, all of it laboring, all of it pointing toward transition. Mark 13 gives practical instruction. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. The signs aren't meant to confuse. They're meant to inform, to prepare, to signal that timing is shifting. When a fig tree shows leaves, you don't debate whether summer might come eventually. You know it's approaching immediately, inevitably. When creation shows signs across multiple systems simultaneously, the same logic applies. This isn't speculation about distant future events. This is recognition that the timeline has advanced, that what was far off is now near, that birth pains have begun. The question isn't whether these events fit the biblical pattern. The documentation proves they do. The question is whether people will recognize the season, whether they'll see the leaves on the tree and understand what's approaching, or whether they'll explain each event individually, missing the forest for the trees, until the moment arrives without them being prepared. Because Scripture is clear about one thing, the signs are meant to be readable. They're not hidden in code that only experts can decipher. They're meant for ordinary people, farmers who know trees, fishermen who know weather, anyone willing to observe and connect what they're seeing to what was predicted. The pattern is clear. The timeline is advancing. The birth pains are documented. What comes next isn't random. It's not if, it's when. And the spacing between events determines how much time remains. If the pains are getting closer together, the birth is approaching. The signs are saying one thing clearly: time is shorter than most people realize. And what that means for America specifically requires looking at another biblical parallel. One that's uncomfortable, one that most would prefer to avoid, but one that fits the current moment with disturbing precision. Jesus didn't use the Noah comparison casually. He chose it deliberately, knowing exactly what it would communicate. Matthew 24 records his exact words. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. The emphasis isn't on the flood itself, it's on the people's awareness, or lack of it. They weren't ignorant of Noah. Genesis indicates he was building the ark for decades. Some traditions suggest 120 years. Everyone saw the construction. Everyone heard the warnings. Everyone had opportunity to respond. But they didn't. Not because evidence was lacking, because they chose not to see the evidence as relevant to them. They continued normal life, eating, drinking, marrying, planning futures that assumed tomorrow would be like today. Until the day it wasn't. Genesis 6 describes the conditions that preceded judgment. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Not occasional evil, not evil mixed with good, only evil all the time. The description is total, complete, without remainder. And God's response was grief first, then decision. I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created. But even in that decision, mercy appeared. Noah found favor. A remnant was preserved. Warning was given. Time was provided. The parallel to America's current moment is uncomfortable, but unavoidable. Not because America is uniquely evil. Evil exists everywhere, always has. But because America has had access to biblical truth longer and more completely than perhaps any nation in history, and is actively, systematically rejecting it. Not through ignorance, through choice. The signs are visible. The warnings are clear. The documentation is extensive. Yet normal life continues. Markets open. Entertainment plays. Plans are made. Futures are assumed. As if the signs mean nothing. As if the pattern is irrelevant. As if tomorrow is guaranteed to be like today. Peter 2 adds crucial detail. God did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others. Noah preached for years, decades, warning anyone who would listen. Most didn't listen, not because they couldn't hear, because they chose not to believe that judgment would actually come, until it did. The question for America isn't whether signs are appearing. They are, documented across every element of creation. The question is whether anyone is listening, whether the warnings are being heeded, whether people will recognize the season before the door closes. Because in Noah's time there came a specific moment when the door of the ark was shut. Genesis records that God himself closed it. After that moment, no amount of recognition changed anything. The realization came too late. 17 unexplainable events, 9 states, 72 hours. While America went about its daily routine, a pattern emerged that scientists can't fully account for. Water erupted from solid ground where no water should exist. The sky formed shapes that defied natural explanation. Animals fled by the thousands without apparent cause. And buried beneath American soil, ancient warnings surfaced at the exact moment the nation needed to see them. The timing is too precise. The pattern is too clear. Coincidence or something far more deliberate? It started in the Gulf Coast, not with a forecast, not with a warning,